welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to this Saturday Solutions discussion that we conduct regularly every week. My name is Ruhail. Amin. I am a senior editor with BW Businessworld. Dr. Batra was supposed to be here, but somehow he couldn't join us. So today we have a very interesting topic. India's proposed cryptocurrency law, and we have an esteemed panel of speakers to decode what it means and what should happen. They would be sharing their insights. I want to go and introduce my esteemed panelists. We have with us Dr. Pawan Duggal, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. We have Vaibhav Kakkar, partner, Saraf and Partners. Anirudh Rastogi, founder and managing partner, Ikigai Law. We have Vinay Butani, partner, Economic Laws Practice. We have Ms. Rashmi Deshpande, partner, Khaitan and Co. And we have Mr. Sunil, Jain, partner, AnantLaw. And my colleague, Mr. Krishnendra, is with me, who will be co-moderating. We'll be taking on the questions together. So I want to set in a little bit of context before I pose my first question to my esteemed panelist. As per estimates, India has around 2.5 crore users when it comes to cryptocurrency. Add to this an investment of 6 lakh crores, not a small amount. It's all floating in the crypto ecosystem. And dealing with this virtual currency and the technology behind it is not a common man's cup of tea, as we all know by now. And there are no two ways about it. However, the amount of money, the blockchain phenomena, and the interest of the users cannot be ignored at the same time. So I want to go to the only lady on the panel first. To begin with her, Ms. Deshpande, tell me, how should we redefine our approach to a much awaited law while striking the right balance between stakeholder interests?
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me on this panel. There is much desired out of the law, and I suppose it is a long-awaited law. So right now you realize that there is no rules and regulations. So whatever are the genuine businesses, they are following whatever regulations and guidelines that they can find in other laws in order to be appearing to at least come up with a genuine business and appearing to be law-abiding businesses. When you look at regulations per se, they are following AML regulations. They are doing the KYC norm. At the same time, in terms of taxation, which is again a very, very complex issue, income tax, whether income tax will be liable or not, we don't have the clarity. Whether GST, which is even more complex, whether it will be considered as commodity, services, money, etc., etc. There is no clarity on that. So in absence of this clarity and whatever is available right now, the businesses are following up the existing laws. But this is not a long-term solution. And secondly, most importantly, because there are no regulations, we don't know what the government will come up with. One day they can come up and ban the entire business. They can highly regulate it. They can penalize it. So when there is a clarity required, it is easy to do business and it is easy to gain international trust as well. And most importantly, it is very much important to have investor protection. So that is the reason why I suppose we require the law, and it is high time we get in some regulation, however basic they are.
Absolutely. I think very valid points made here. I want to go to Mr. Jain here for his thoughts. Mr. Jain, Mr. Dr. Duggal has also joined us. Welcome, sir. Great to see you here. So I want to go to Mr. Jain at this moment and get his views on how should we look at our approach towards making a law that addresses all the concerns.
The last few years, I think the approach that Indian policy making regime has been taking is like blockchain technology, yes. Cryptocurrency, crypto assets as coins and currencies, no. I think we are moving away from that rigid approach, and I think it is a welcome step. In terms of the legislative draft that are in circulation already, we know how strictly cryptocurrency and coins are defined. It pretty much cover everything that has economic and financial implications and is amenable to be codified in terms of a computer program or a software. And absolutely everything, the entire gamut of crypto world, including non-fungible token, etc., everything is covered. In fact, reward programs, frequent flyer miles, and gift cards, traveler cards could also be covered by that. But of late, and especially the legislative draft that we hear is on the horizon, tend to veer down the approach a little bit. We hope that not only we are embracing the blockchain technology in relation to various sectors like our land management records, which is going currently the digitization process, e-stamping, demat transactions in relation to general securities that are handled by NFTL and CDSL, but we also start looking at crypto asset as at least having utility as a utility token, and as also uh, a currency, if I may, in relation to uh, its use within particular platforms that are driven by blockchain technology, example Ethereum, Ether. And therefore, in that I think sequence, it is important that we look beyond the conventional way of looking at crypto and enhance our vistas and enhance our vision towards broad basing its use in the Indian economic system.
Absolutely. I think taking on from this point of broad basing and given the complexity of our culture and our users and our demography, I think it, of course, is not easy. Well, suppose recently when there was the crypto was in news, a lot of people were criticizing that why can't we have the Western approach to it? But it's not so easy. You can't have a copy paste system in our country, which is so complex. Dr. Dugal, I want to bring you here on your thoughts about the much awaited law. How can it strike the right balance? What should it entail in your view?
I think minimal enablement has to be the mantra for going forward. Overkill is to destroy the ecosystem. And that's something that nobody would want. Not the government, not the crypto ecosystem stakeholders as a whole. But then where do we start? And we've been seeing the range of reports in the public domain are swinging from one end of the pendulum to the other, right from banning to just about looking at private blockchains to stuff like that. I think there's lack of appropriate clarity. And because there's inadequate discussion amongst various stakeholders, we are now coming to a position where maybe we may be coming up with a new law which may be slightly lopsided, primarily because appropriate input from all stakeholders have not been taken. But I think we could learn from the experiences of a lot of other countries. Again, copy paste is not a good idea, and this will work in the Indian ecosystem. But I think if I learn from the learnings of what we've seen in Malta, in Belarus, in Estonia, then to a large extent we can potentially build on the building blocks that have been given in India under the Indian Information Technology Act 2000. Because at the end of the day, any crypto ecosystem or a crypto asset is ultimately nothing but data and information in the electronic form. And that being so, its primary fundamentals have already been covered under Section 4 of the Information Technology Act 2000. But what direction will the government take is something that we'll have to wait and watch. But some key thrust areas will definitely include not just legal sanction and legal validity, but also legal enablement. We'll also look at some bit of crypto cyber crimes. We have to look at the intersection of crypto and cyber security. We have to also look at a variety of other things, particularly dealing with the rights, duties, and responsibilities of the crypto ecosystem stakeholders, given the fact that they're already coming in the definition of an intermediary under Section 21W of the Information Technology Act 2000. And further, given the fact that the government, even if it wants right now, without coming up with this new law, could potentially try to regulate the activities and affairs of these intermediaries by coming up with appropriate rules and regulations under Section 87(2) of the Indian Information Technology Act 2000. So everything really depends on what the government wants to do, how it wants to do up, but more significantly, this new bill must really envisage the hopes and aspirations of the crypto ecosystem stakeholders. You cannot have a bill in a vacuum which does not reflect the existing ground realities.
Absolutely. You have to have a very wholesome approach to it. I mean, every stakeholder has to have their interest reflected in it. At this moment, I want to go to Mr. Rastogi and then to Mr. Kakkar. Mr. Rastogi, Dr. Dugal raised that we still need to do a lot more talking between the stakeholders to understand their concerns while addressing it. What is your take on building this law and passing this law, getting this stakeholder interest in place? How would you look at it?
Sure. No, thanks for that. So I think lack of proper stakeholder consultation has been a challenge for the industry and the sector for a while now, and I think for some reason not very well understood. There's been a great deal of secrecy and a lack of openness around how we have crafted our narratives around cryptocurrency and blockchain in this country. And to give you an example, when we were before the Supreme Court during between 2018 and 20 in challenge to the RBI ban, at some point the Supreme Court really pulled up the RBI, saying that, well, every single bone of contention raised by you has really been addressed by the exchanges and by the industry and representations before coming to us to the court. And for some reason, you've not done public consultations, you've not addressed any of these representations, etc. So I think, and even after that pulling up of sorts, not much changed on that front. I think it's only recently, and I would say, I'm very pleasantly surprised that there's a lot more understanding and maturity in the policy ecosystem about some of these issues. It has come about to a point where a lot of regulators have now begun to have consultations, but they're still not being run in the manner that we see in other areas of policy and in the manner that we would like, especially for an area that is as complex and rapidly evolving as this is, where you really need to kind of dive deeper, engage with different stakeholders. And talking about the multiplicity of stakeholders here, right? So the government, of course, has a fair set of concerns ranging from money laundering, lack of control over monetary policy, tax evasion, and whatnot. There are of course there's investor protection, which is a key consideration, and investors also, right? There's the retail unsophisticated investor, which we need to protect for. There is the sophisticated investor base. There are banks which have had a love-hate relationship with the industry for a while, and as you can see, a lot being reported where banks have been refusing to service the industry despite the RBI ban having been lifted. There are the exchanges that are one stakeholder, the various crypto businesses that are coming up. There are the Web 2.0 companies, which feel threatened at one point, on one hand, from the emergence of their decentralized new avatars, but at the same time, they also want to embrace decentralization. And the problem that I want to come to is that a law that is looking at this problem from a singular lens, right? That is, say, for example, if the law is looking at all cryptocurrencies and categorizing them under this one blanket umbrella of being an investment asset, right? For instance, and there are many such categorizations at play. What while you solve for one set of concerns for one set of stakeholders, you are not you're creating problems for the other set of stakeholders. So just to give you an example, when we solve for investor protection by saying that, well, this is an investment asset, and say we want a pre-approved list of cryptocurrencies, One, what about the more sophisticated investors? What about the technological angle to this, where, say the developers in the country are actually building applications, decentralized applications using blockchain, who now cannot access this set of cryptocurrencies for development purposes that you have now chosen to ban, right? So I think we need to have a slightly more broad-based approach to this regulation. We need to understand that there are multiple stakeholders and multiple concerns that need to be addressed, and that level of nuance will come from public consultation, from consultations with all these stakeholders and bringing them together. And while I just one last closing point here, that I don't expect that we will get there, because this is a complicated issue. We will not get there in one go. So what you really need is a staged approach. You need a slightly more light touch regulatory framework to begin with, and then you build out the granular details over a period of time, working with various stakeholders, whether through a self-regulatory organization or otherwise. But let's not try to solve for all of this at once, because we will surely get it wrong.
Mr. Rastogi, very valid points. I think putting it in a bracket and saying that all things will be addressed for everyone, I think may not be the right approach, as you pointed out. And also maybe it's a staged, it has stages, it's not in one go you'll be able to address. Very valid point here. Mr. Kakkar, your thoughts?
I think to begin with, when we take a step back and look at, how this industry is sort of developed, I find it quite fascinating that this is a space where, there are some reports which are looking at somewhere about $15 to $20 billion of investments have happened without a shred of regulation in place. In a country which is where, people often over-label the government for sort of over-regulating everything. I think this is quite fascinating that this is one space which virtually has had no regulation. You, of course, did see the misadventure from the Reserve Bank of India, which tried taking somewhat of a passive approach when they tried, directing all regulated entities to not deal with crypto. And of course, then the Supreme Court order came through. I have a slightly different take on everything that's been discussed so far, especially, juxtaposing it with some of the previous points made by Anirudh. I think the first thing first, if you look at the Supreme Court judgment that was passed in the context of crypto, if one was to carefully look at the detailing of that judgment, I think what really happened was RBI lost the battle, but it won the war. And I think what's become very clear is that Supreme Court in that judgment, of course, eventually struck down the circular saying that it was arbitrary, it was excessive, disproportionate to the purpose that the ban seeks to achieve, because there's very little material on record. But what it did was it very clearly sort of articulated RBI's unchallenged position on monetary policy and the ability to regulate and deal with currency. What that has really meant is that I think now it's almost a near certainty. Of course, the 2019 report of Mr. Garg led committee and subsequently the previous version of the bill and the new bill, what has actually transpired is two things. I think one, what is very clear is I think over and over again, it's being discussed. I don't think people will now use the term cryptocurrency anymore because I think it'll become manifestly very clear that what you're going to be regarding cryptos is just a form of an asset class. And I do see there is strong merit in regarding it as one. I think much like most jurisdictions, I think RBI, this particular law will clearly ban using crypto as a medium of exchange and therefore banning it as a usage as legal tender and as a currency. I think which was, I think, absolutely needed because it is sort of the play on this sector is sort of so unbridled and unregulated that you're seeing a lot of speculation and a lot of activity which is becoming very difficult to shepherd through. So I think that's absolutely needed. What this new bill will also do is it will pave the way for the RBI to come up with its own version of a virtual currency. I think both steps are very much welcome. What is absolutely a must, when we talk about innovation, we also have to bear in mind the interests of the small consumers, the retail investors, and the fly-by-night operators which are sort of involved in this industry. So I think what will really happen is that you will basically see a clear outright ban of crypto as being used as a medium of exchange and being therefore suggested to be used as a medium of currency. And fun fact, barring I think one country in Southern America, I don't think any other countries embraced it as a currency. So I think you will clearly call that ban out. And of course, then just like say art, people can keep debating about, Ruhail, how valuable a particular art form is. I think crypto will be characterized as an asset class for times to come. And it will pave way for some sort of a light touch regulatory framework. I think Dr. Duggal was absolutely right. I think it's very important to not do an overkill, not throw the baby out of the bathwater. But I think it's not going to be that easy for the RBI and for the government to even come up with a framework for light touch. Because the problem is, where do you regulate it? Where do you end the regulation? Do you end the regulation by regulating and calling out a few currencies? You have those for crypto when it's being traded on exchanges. But I think the important challenge, Ruhail, will be that for the first time you will actually end up regulating exchanges. But remember, much like the capital markets, where you not only regulate the exchanges, you also regulate the issuer of that instrument.
Here, I will come to those. I will be having another question specifically on this. At this stage, I just want to bring in Mr. Butani with his views on you have heard the panelists before, and a lot of valid points raised, some calling it for a soft touch approach for the initial framework. What are your quick thoughts on this?
So thanks, Ruhail, for having me on this esteemed panel. I think, listen, the subject is very fascinating. Okay, pretty much everything is covered by all the speakers. But I mean, if you go back to 2013, and we're now practically entering 2022, it's been nearly a decade for the government to realize the where we're heading in terms of cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and virtual currencies. So effectively, I think it's pretty apparent that obviously the central bank is not going to allow a parallel currency to become a tender, right? But in this entire gambit, you do realize the importance of blockchain as a technology. So there are going to be challenges as to how everything from a larger perspective is going to be dealt with. I think, for the sake of repeating, which, all the speakers have, I think it's definitely needs to be a soft touch, approach, as opposed to doing an overkill. Also keeping in mind, the bill, I mean, if you look at it, it's called Cryptocurrency and Regulation of Official Digital Currency, right? So I think, in absence of, explicit text out in the public domain, I think it's all going to be speculation in terms of whatever experts have their views on, from a larger perspective, right from your, your FEMA to AML to, cross-border KYC, and whether, if you were to regularize the trading platforms, what are the challenges that are effectively going to happen to do that?
Right.
And also to add, we've reached a stage where, as Anirudh mentioned, there are applications being built on blockchain. So how are we going to also deal with that? We've got NFTs coming in. We've got, it's something that has to be holistically dealt with.
Right. There's an echo happening. Maybe somebody's Facebook Live or something is open. I would just request to mute it. I want to come to you, Ms. Deshpande, but before that, just want to go to Dr. Duggal first. Sir, we just know how much of money is riding on these investments in crypto. They have a concern. How do we address that concern in the existing scenario? And another question that I want to ask you is that it's already an over-regulated, finance is a very over-regulated system in any case. Tell me, what do we look up to when it comes to the crypto regulations as we go on from here? These 2 points. One is what happens to the existing people who have invested in crypto. Second is how does the regulatory framework, how will it pan out as we move on from here, in your view?
I think the law will have to somehow make a distinction between various buckets. First is the bucket of people who already are in the crypto ecosystem and having already invested whatever their assets are. And second is the second bucket, which is the potential people who are likely to now come into this ecosystem. Clearly, you cannot take very drastic steps in terms of distinguishing or discriminating one bucket versus the other. but certain minimum common parameters and denominators will have to be established. Yes, the government is still coming up with a regulatory mindset of the finance sector. They are effectively still seeing it from those color, and no wonder those spectacles colors are bound to have some kind of an impact in the way how this new legislation could potentially be coming in. But they're already talking about what? If you look at the Reuters report, they're talking about a potential mandatory reporting. They're looking at making it an offense. If you don't report, they're looking at penal consequences. I think that's something that's going to scare away a lot of people, because in this level of uncertainty, what's going to happen is people are going to take panic decisions. Now, already there's panic in the ecosystem, and I don't want the replication of what happened a couple of years back, where India's loss is Saudi's or Dubai's or Singapore's gain. We don't want this ecosystem stakeholders to be leaving the shores of India so as to do their activities in other territories. Therefore, yes, to the extent it's important on money laundering, by all means, to the extent that it's not used for cyber crimes or criminal activities, by all means, these are given acceptable parameters. But the moment you say that, look, if you don't report, and I'm going to put you to jail, that's going to give a wrong message. Somewhere around the message is going to come that India is coming with a big danda in its hand, and it's ultimately aiming to destroy its crypto ecosystem. That messaging must not be clearly put in that particular direction, because that could be more self-defeating and self-harming in the coming times. I'm also keen to particularly highlight the fact that very quickly, while this is not the we would want the government to do, but at the same time, the various aspects for massive number of crypto crimes that have risen, those will have to be appropriately addressed. Given the fact that the Information Technology Act 2000 is silent on these crypto crimes, and given the fact that the Indian Penal Code is not necessarily very well placed to cover a large chunk of these newly emerging crypto crimes, that's something that will have to be categorically looked at. Also, the legal validity of smart contracts will also have to be one thrust area that I would want this particular legislation to go into, given the fact that the Indian Contract Act does not travel that far ahead, and we can't blame that because smart contracts were non-existent. Ultimately, the focus has to be moving from the currency elements to the broad enabling elements for blockchain as a technology. Already, blockchain is becoming a big game changer. If we have the appropriate minimal support of legislation, then we can work wonders. But in case if we are going to mess up our messaging or are going to really come up with a traditional mindset on the crypto ecosystem regulation, then I'm sure that we are not necessarily going to address the entire issues in their complete wholeness. Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very, very well said, sir. Ms. Deshpande, given the existing situation that all the investors and people who are interested in crypto are witnessing, what are the risks associated with dealing in cryptocurrencies that the user base must be aware of from here on, in your view?
Very good question. Lot of things, in fact, for the user. One of the last would be to understand that this is a very complex market. But keeping that aside, let me start with taxation. You have your income tax, you have your GST. Now, of course, under the Income Tax Act, nor under GST, we have any clarification as to what kind of a treatment you have to give to these crypto assets. So to be on the safe side, what most of the people are doing is treating them as capital assets, and they are paying the relevant income tax on it. So, which is fine, which is still fine in terms of income tax. When I talk about GST, the problem becomes more complex, and I'll explain why. When you talk about these cryptocurrency exchanges, or you talk about any business associated with cryptocurrency, the taxation could be clear that they are providing services in the form of a platform. They are earning their commission, they are earning their premium, whatever they are earning, and they are paying tax on that. But when you are transacting crypto assets, whether it is crypto coins, whether it is crypto tokens, what treatment do you give them? Do you call them goods and you pay GST as per the rate of goods, which again is 4-5 slab rates? Do you treat them as services? Do you treat them as money? Because if you actually see the definition of money under GST, I can very well put them under money. But then it will be contradictory to the other laws.
Right.
Can I put them under actionable claim? Okay. So actionable claim, except for lottery, is again not under GST. If you call them money, it is not under GST. You can't call them goods because goods should have a utility which crypto coins do not have. What do? Do you call them services? Not all the crypto tokens. Maybe some of the crypto tokens, the utility tokens, you might call them services. So when you look at cryptocurrency or crypto asset, they themselves have so many branches. Where do you put them in terms of taxing under GST? So here is a big ambiguity, here is a big confusion where clarification is required. Okay, and we are talking about GST, which is levied at the rate of 18%, 12%, and sometimes 28%. If you do not have clarity on that, and buying and selling is done by small traders, okay, you are sitting in a big liability tomorrow if the government comes up saying that no, we assume that the interpretation was there and you were supposed to pay GST.
Absolutely.
So from the tax angle, if I put it, you're sitting on a big liability if there is no clarity on that.
Perfect. Very well raised. Mr. Kakkar, I want to come to you here. A lot of investments writing the same question to you. What should be people and the user base aware of henceforth? Because they rushed into it. It appeared that something they are missing getting into the space. They invested, they put their hard-earned money, but now they were not aware of the regulatory framework that came in between. From here on, what would be the mindset of the investor, first of all, if we have to decode that? And what should they be aware of to invest in crypto?
Well, the investors are just like deers in the headlights. They have absolutely no idea. People continue to be investing, not even knowing what the legal position is, and I wouldn't blame them. Fact of the matter remains that till date there is no clear position of the government. RBI did take a public position. The Supreme Court struck down that ban, and ever since then there's just been continuous discussion and debate. But often in India, what actually happens is we've seen that with the consumer tech sector as well, with the e-commerce sector, that when there is no regulation, sometimes things become too big for then the government to ban them. And I think that's what's happened with crypto. Same thing happened with the e-commerce sector. The whole foreign investment kept coming into the e-commerce sector to a point where suddenly the government had to regulate altogether a new animal called marketplace. And so they couldn't ban it any further. I think something similar has happened with crypto. I think what's absolutely important is at a user level for users to be aware that it is a risky asset, much like any other investment asset class. And I think let's sort of break this down into multiple parts. Blockchain as a technology, yes, of course the government is embracing it. In fact, yesterday MeitY has come up with a detailed paper on policy position on blockchain as a technology. So you continuously keep seeing NFT and other uses of blockchain in various other facets. But crypto will continue to be really a financial investment that people are making in order to make a gain, just like how they would invest in the stock market. I think at the moment it's so unregulated. Fun fact, people keep continuing to invest. Foreign Exchange Management Act and the LRS rules don't even permit resident individuals to invest in crypto. But money continues to keep going abroad. It is a bit of a mockery of the current RBI, exchange control framework, when remittances happen either when they are aggregated by exchanges or by when individuals remit. So I think a lot of confusion is there. Individuals are unknowingly violating those rules. And I think which is why it would be very important for the regulators. I think also it's very important. I think it's the right thing for the exchanges to come up with a voluntary disclosure regime, to have a self-regulatory code. And I think some of the big ones, some of the prominent ones are doing that. But there are a lot of other errants in the system. There are a lot of other miscreants as well in the system. So I think investors need to be super careful at the moment. And at the same point in time, I would say that the government and the regulators need to quickly now evolve an approach. Sometimes what happens is this whole legislative process, you can actually have a case of operation successful but patient dead. So you need to time it properly, and you need to time it quickly enough. And I think the point that I was trying to make, Ruhail, at the point in time when you sort of moved away.
Sorry. Yeah, that was right.
What I was saying was where I am little not sort of clear, or rather I wouldn't envy the regulator and the government, is that when you start regulating and start wearing the hat of a regulator, how do you regulate when the underlying issuers of the currency are sitting overseas? So if you look at the financial market, you look at the stock market, you look at the issuers are also regulated, the exchanges are also regulated. Here will be one exception where, of course, with now so much invested, you won't ban these cryptocurrencies. So you will regard them as an asset class. You will ban its use as a currency, but you will give them the cover of being regarded as an asset class. But the issuers of those asset class are sitting overseas, which you cannot enforce. And so therefore it's going to be tricky. On what basis will you say A, B, C, D currencies cannot be traded on these exchanges, but D, E, F, H currencies can be traded on these exchanges? So it's going to be a tricky area. So I don't envy the job of the regulator at the moment, but on the issue of consultation, I think I'm reasonably clear that this winter session will only see the bill being tabled. I think it will definitely go to a JPC, and hopefully the JPC will invite more stakeholder consultations so that you have a much more clearer position. But as I think Anirudh rightly said, I don't think we can achieve everything in one go. So I think let's start with having a light touch regulatory framework, recognizing it as an asset class, and then regulations can continuously keep evolving.
Absolutely. I think, of course, the regulators are not in an envious position, as you said. There are a lot of complexities involved. Mr. Jain, your quick thoughts on this?
I agree with what Vaibhav has already spoken on this issue. We clearly need to treat cautiously. I think what we are discussing right now is a huge universe of 4,000 to 6,000 crypto projects that needs legitimization, that needs codification, that needs canonizing in terms of how they are looked at in Indian policy regime. I think we clearly need to make a beginning and a small beginning at that. Just deal with all private cryptocurrencies and explain as to what is the classification of those assets being held by existing investors, what all investment can take place in future in relation to these crypto assets that will be permitted by the code, and also some clarity on how the taxation will operate. The sum and substance of clarification provided in the parliament as of now tells you that when you have generated some surplus on crypto assets, it is indeed taxable in some sense. Either you treat it as a capital asset and therefore treat it as a case of a long-term capital gain when you have held them for 36 months and pay long-term capital gains tax, short-term capital gains tax if the holding period is less than 36 months. You treat them, the surplus, as some sort of income from other sources, and then therefore your tax slab rate gets applicable. You look at the entire international tax and cross-border tax issues in relation to the income that gets generated. And of course, when there are certain investment financial companies that hold these crypto assets as stocks, then the classification that becomes relevant is business income. What kind of business expenditure you will allow for the eventual net profit to be taxed as business income. So those are the issues that clearly needs some simple approach and some simplicity and clarity put together by the government, and to make a beginning, a small one.
Very, very well said, Mr. Rastogi, and then Mr. Butani. Mr. Rastogi, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to go back to something that I said a little earlier, and a couple of things where when we speak about, just to take one example, what Vaibhav touched upon, that how do I regulate? How does a regulator regulate an issuer who's based outside of India, right? And that's precisely the challenge when you look at something from which is so multifaceted from a singular lens. So the moment I start looking at it from a securities lens, the obvious question is, where is the issuer located? Is the issuer within my jurisdiction or not? But if you were to change that lens to one of technology, right? That this is it's a network of global interconnected computing systems that no one person governs, and you cannot really envisage blockchain technology flourishing in a purely domestic setup, right? It is global inherently. Then you have to recognize that your issuers will be wherever they will be, and you have to live with it, and you have to regulate accordingly. So point simply being, I mean, I'm not. I very well acknowledge the concern articulated by Vaibhav and many others on the panel. But all I'm saying is that the challenge is, if we were to look at this problem from a singular lens, which is bound to happen. So there's a lot more nuance needed. I'll give you one other example, which is of when we speak of blockchain being say a currency, right? Or even when we speak of say encouraging blockchain, but recognizing cryptocurrency only as a financial asset and not as a technology. The challenge that what we fail to sometimes recognize is that yes, blockchain can exist without cryptocurrencies, but it's a different format of the blockchain than it was initially envisaged to be. So you can have a private blockchain network, much akin to a local area network, right? Where a set of 20 computers within the country governed by our rules, and we do what we do or want to do with it, right? As opposed to a cryptocurrency enabled global network where you need cryptocurrency in order to make that, kind of incentivize and really decentralize the system. So without going into much technicality,
right,
enables you to run it in a decentralized fashion. So quickly kind of closing that point, that it is very akin to having a debate between, do I want a local area network within my country is governed by my rules, or do I want the internet, which is essentially a global network not governed by one entity, one country, and it has its advantages.
Right. No worries. I mean, that is like something very, very validly put out. Mr. Butani, your thoughts on this this aspect? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think Ruhail, I mean, if I may to sort of sum up, what probably, if I were to, anticipate. See, I think categorizing crypto as an asset will ensure that there is definitely no overlap between the digital currency which the RBI plans to launch and crypto. There are news that there would be a cutoff date which would be prescribed to ensure that all the current exchanges are registered with SEBI, right? And I think bringing crypto platforms under SEBI will only ensure that there are serious players in the market, as opposed to, I mean, there have been reports about, ICO scams where, there were fraudulent, initial coin offerings whereby crypto assets either never existed or after, having developed, the developers just disappear. So I think it's definitely going to be something which is going to be a wait and watch. It's going to be a challenge to effectively regulate everything under one law, as a sense to, sum it up.
All right. So I want to bring in my colleague, Krishnendra Joshi. He has a question for all of you. Krishnendra, why don't you switch on the camera and ask the question?
Yeah, so hi. So I'm currently in Sri Lanka. I'm facing some connection issues. Sorry for that.
I thought that's in India only, but great. Okay, it's a global phenomenon. Okay, great.
So I would like to start with Ms. Deshpande, and if she can dwell with the specific issue that is getting a little less talked about, is the ambiguity in the taxation aspect. What do we consider it? Do we consider it as a derivative, considering its volatility, and treat it accordingly? Does it go under capital gains? Does it go under other sources? How do we treat it under tax?
I've already spoken about tax. Let me break it down further. So when we talk about crypto assets, we all know that there are multiple facets. It's not just currency. but you have something called cryptocurrency, which is your bitcoins. You have something called crypto tokens, and crypto tokens can be further broken down into perhaps security tokens or maybe utility tokens also. So you have different asset class. Now, the point over here and the challenge for the government over here is to first of all understand the complexity and put the complexity in such a fashion that a taxation on any of the assets is very clear. If I look at the taxation aspect as of now, and if I talk simply from the GST perspective, like I said earlier, of course, there is a GST applicability when there is a service provided by cryptocurrency exchanges for the purposes of exchanging and providing a platform. They earn a premium and they pay GST on that. But what about the buy and the sale of cryptocurrency assets, crypto assets? Okay, there is no clarity on that for the very reason that we don't know how or what can we treat them. As of now, if you ask for my opinion, I would say that the buy and sale of cryptocurrencies per se is completely out of the GST regime because of the way I interpret the taxation. You say you don't call it money. You say it's difficult to call it goods because, like I said earlier, they don't have a utility factor. It's not a service. Perhaps you can term utility tokens as service, but as of now, there is no clarity. So what do I do? Can I term them as securities? If I term them as securities, it's clearly out of the GST domain because the GST law does not apply on securities. Can I term them as money? Again, there is no clarity. So ultimately, if you ask me as of today, on buying and selling of crypto assets, I don't see any GST liability. But having said that, and the numbers that you had shared with us in the morning, there are around 6 lakhs crore of investment sitting in crypto assets. Do you think the government is going to let go of that tax revenue? No, it's not a feasible option even for the government because it is a very good tax revenue source. So hence, getting a clarity on this is very, very much required. As far as income tax is concerned, as I again mentioned earlier also, people are treating it as long-term, short-term capital gains, and to that extent they are paying money. They are paying taxes on that. But then again, there is a lack of clarity over there. So hence, what I would urge when this particular draft is being tabled, one of the main important major principles that have to be cleared by the draft bill is what treatment do you give to this asset class. So that's what is one of the desirable things from this law.
Okay, absolutely. Point taken. And Mr. Jain, would you like to add?
Well, to begin with GST, I think a few things are quite clear about the GST because this integrated tax that has assimilated excise, central sales tax, state level value added taxes, and operates as a destination based consumption tax. So when you are consuming goods and services into taxable territory, you are exigible to tax. There are gray areas, but at least in terms of those assets where a non-fungible token, the kind of underlying property that is there in relation to an NFT also decides the classification as goods. So for example, digital art collectibles, will they not be goods? And to that extent, will there not be a taxation? Of course, there will be a taxation with GST. And as far as the service regime is concerned, these exchanges, in being a marketplace for dealing with crypto assets, are providing a service. So therefore, clearly, when other than free services model, other than no brokerage charges model, when there are some charges in your contract note that comes at the end of the day when you indulge in trades, any service charge that is applicable clearly exists to tax. One can debate as to which slab we should fix in these services from 0 to 58%. But yes, the median rate does come to our rescue. A 9% state GST and central GST clearly is staring in your face when you're providing any services in relation to the entire crypto asset ecosystem. And therefore, we also just need a few clarities on exactly how the operational mechanics, the rate system will work in GST. It's a very, very broad text. And therefore, absolutely everything that is not covered by an exemption, that is not under a negative list, is going to be taxable. There can be no further clarity on this. As far as income tax is concerned, I think we are zeroing down very quickly on the classification of the income first and then the tax treatment, because if we are in agreement that crypto assets will be a financial asset and an asset class category, then it solves the problem a lot for anybody other than holding it as, say, for income from other sources purpose or even a business inventory. Everybody else, when they're holding it as an asset class, clearly is looking at what kind of holding period gives you what kind of taxation. A long-term capital gains 20%, a more favorable long-term capital gains that applies to listed securities, etc., of 10%, and then a short-term capital gains, which is as per the applicable slab rate in the progressive system of taxation that we have. But clearly, the capital gains tax classification will be much simpler and is something that we should look to adopt in relation.
Absolutely. So much to ponder on. So I would like to touch upon another interesting aspect which I see get less talked about. I would like to know from Mr. Kakkar, what do you have to say, sir, about RBI's interesting stance on the enforcement side?
Thanks, Krishnendra. That's actually a very good question. In fact, I don't know how many of...
I don't know if I could call it interesting, but I would like to hear it from you.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. Interesting enough for the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, Dr. Usha Thorat, to have written an editorial last week, where she also called it out and said, I'm not so sure, I sort of looked after the Exchange Control Department. I'm not so sure if this was even permitted. So remittances, now here is where the tricky part is. If you look at the Foreign Exchange Management Act and the rules framed thereunder, there are certain nature of transactions which are regarded as capital account transactions. Now, those capital account transactions cannot happen unless there is a specific permission of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, Reserve Bank of India, thus far, the government of India has not characterized how they will treat crypto as a financial asset. Again, I'm repeating that the blockchain as a technology is a completely different facet, but crypto as a financial currency or as a financial asset, whatever labeling one may want to give, how it's going to be treated from a FEMA point of view. Now, the liberalized remittance scheme permitted resident individuals to remit $250,000 out of this country to acquire shares, units in mutual funds, venture capital funds, other forms of assets. Now, with there being no clarity on crypto and RBI continuing to caution third-party entities in terms of remittances from India, fact of the matter remains today, if you or I are actually remitting monies either to an exchange, which are then onward getting remitted cross-border, or remitted from India, they're all technically, in my view, not in compliance with the LRS regime, or for that matter, the RBI framework under FEMA. Now, clearly, as in when the government and the Reserve Bank articulates what their final position is on the subject matter of crypto as a financial investment tool or as a currency or as other forms of characterization, they will also need to sort of synchronize their exchange control regime, much like how my other colleagues, Rashmi and Sunil, have spoken about the taxation regime being sort of needing to also be clarified. Similarly, the exchange control regime will also need to be clarified. See, today, and this is what Dr. Usha Thorat also called out, there are a lot of loopholes in terms of, you may have such a tightened regime around exchange control and for how monies will move through banks, but a lot of money can actually move and cross-border flows can happen through crypto. And that is happening right now unchecked. Fun fact, China saw a loss of $80 billion despite such a strong ban, which the flight of capital took place about $80 billion. We know that China, there are certain stringent rules around some of the tech companies that they're currently facing. In the backdrop of that, $80 billion moved out of the country. This has actually been reported by the Chinese Federal Bank. So the reason, therefore, I'm calling out is that It's one thing to clearly lay out your position on how you're going to deal with it domestically, but cross-border flows will also need to sort of also go synchronize in the government's policy on that.
That's some alarming numbers there. And speaking of China, I'd quickly move to Mr. Duggal and know his views on the global response on the crypto regulations and all the talk surrounding it.
Well, globally, it's not yet a unanimous house. Countries are divided because it's still the classical case of 5 blind men trying to describe an elephant. The complete potential of crypto is still not yet being fully understood by governments. So you have a couple of approaches. You have the approach which Malta has taken, which has come up with 3 dedicated laws on blockchain. No wonder it's called the blockchain island of the world. We've seen a new approach in Belarus in the form of the Belarus crypto asset legislation, with which I was involved with. And that particular legislation is specifically looking at granting legality to crypto assets as legal tender within a certain specified territory, apart from stipulating various responsibilities of the crypto ecosystem players in Belarus. We can also look at how Estonia is looking at the entire issue of crypto as also Switzerland. But I think each country to its own facts. You can't really replicate the models in the Indian context because the Indian ground realities are completely different. The numbers are different. Here also, we have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of other countries who come up with blockchain laws had other laws, whether it was on data protection, whether it was enabling electronic formats. But in India, we've seen a classical, shall I say, scarcity of legal frameworks, barring one mother legislation being the Information Technology Act 2000, and some rules and regulations made thereunder. And the Indian approach of the Bollywood masala filmmaking is something that may work in some quarters, may not work in all quarters. Our ability to have legislations like the IT Act, which is nothing like a typical Bollywood masala film, has got various masalas, but doesn't have the masalas for the crypto ecosystem. So you can't blame them because this legislation predated the establishment of the crypto ecosystem. So right now, we have adopted an approach of just trying to come up with smaller subset legislations under the broad umbrella of the IT Act, because if you take out the IT Act, the other smaller legislations may not stand. So we're building on the legal foundations given in terms of legal recognition to the electronic format by the IT Act, whether it's the Aadhaar Act, whether it's the Data Protection Act, and now whether it's going to be the cryptocurrency bill. Each one of them are subsets under the broader umbrella, but still no crystal clarity of how we should go forward. So I think a lot of countries are looking to how India is going to look in this direction, because India is an important player, and what it does could, to a large extent, could also influence a number of other nations in coming up with similar approaches. And also the approach on intermediary liability that's prevailing in India being substantially different from there in the US. It will be interesting to see what kind of responsibilities are we going to straddle the crypto ecosystem stakeholders or intermediaries, given the fact that there will be crypto service providers on the one hand, there will continue to be also intermediaries under the Information Technology Act 2000 on the other hand, and there will also continue to be data repositories and data stakeholders under the Data Protection Act. So you are now effectively coming with a great challenge. You are suddenly going to put up a lot of obligations of compliances to same people who are just adopting different roles in different ecosystems. And therefore, I see a potential conflict also coming up. But let's wait and watch how things evolve in India.
Anything you'd like to add from what Dr. Duggal said?
I mean, I broadly do agree. I think that's the way to go ahead. As I've been saying, I think there's definitely a lot more clarity now on that the government is not looking to ban. They are looking to regulate, but what that the nature of that regulation is going to be, I think, will determine whether India is a participant in this multi-billion-dollar economy in the coming years or is not. And so we just need to get it right. But I do agree with everything Dr. Duggal said.
So now I would like to address another interesting aspect on NFTs. Like, despite a large interest from internet users, the internet NFTs, and are NFTs a backdoor scheme for private cryptos? How do you see NFTs? I'll start with Anirudh.
So fundamentally different things, right? I mean, I'm not sure why we would call it a backdoor scheme of sorts. Let's first just talk of it from a conceptual perspective, and right. I mean, the fundamental difference between cryptocurrencies as they're conventionally understood and NFTs is that cryptocurrencies are fungible, and that's why many of them can be used as a currency if you would want to, right? So they're fungible in the sense one Bitcoin is the same as another Bitcoin, and therefore you can exchange it with somebody else. You can barter it. Non-fungible tokens are an evolution in that technology, where the token itself is unique. Each token is unique. It can represent something unique, and therefore it can hold unique value. And that's why there's so much noise around use of NFTs as digital art, or using it for representing any kind of IP. So it could be music, it could be other kinds of content, etc. It could be your land record certificate, it could be your Aadhaar card, right? Therefore, they also present a very different set of regulatory concerns from each other, right? Where one of the key concerns with your fungible tokens or typical cryptocurrencies is their use in the payments ecosystem, and therefore their use for say money laundering, right, or terrorism financing. May not necessarily be presented in the same manner in NFTs. I'm not saying that NFTs can't be used for money laundering. They can, and there are all kinds of creative ways in which people will try to do and misuse new technology or whatever means are available to them. But they are not exactly, because they are non-fungible, they are unique. They can't really be used as a currency in the same way, and therefore present a different set of regulatory concerns. And when that happens, you ought to regulate them differently as well, right? So for the regulator, I think it is important to acknowledge that distinction in whatever law they come up with, because otherwise one broad brush stroke is going to inadequately or disproportionately regulate NFTs, which is a completely different, not completely, but it's a different technology with different regulatory concerns. So I think that's how I look at it. I don't think it's meant to be a backdoor entry for anything. Of course, people will find creative ways to, and ultimately they both come from the same underlying technology. So people will find ways to, yes, of course, use one for the other. But that's not the intent. That's not what they're meant to be.
Vinay, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I think I agree with Anirudh. I think the question that needs to be really addressed is, what impact will the proposed bill have on NFTs? And obviously, which depends on how NFTs are categorized, right? Because unlike cryptocurrencies, many NFTs are backed by physical assets, right? So NFTs are nothing but they're practically subsets of crypto tokens or cryptocurrencies. So, any NFTs along with other tokens such as utility tokens, fan tokens, stable coins are integral components of your digital asset ecosystem. So any regulation which adversely impacts the cryptocurrencies will definitely jeopardize the growth, associated business activity with the digital tokens, including NFTs. However, and this is something, I'm happy to probably, correct it out here, is when we speak about a backdoor entry, right? I mean, most of these NFT platforms are in a sense, you could trade in NFTs only by using their, cryptocurrencies, right? So it effectively so your buy and sell of those NFTs are, by using those, specific currencies, your digital currencies. So in a sense, if you are going to be creating a supply and demand wherein you are regulated only to trade in those NFTs by specific, those digital currencies, hence the question really comes is that, are we trying to, in a way, create a backdoor entry, or, from a larger scheme of things, creating more coins in the market to create a supply and demand issue?
Some very interesting insights there. I would now really move to a very unspoken, less spoken topic that people are not talking about. What about the digital rupee, the Indian rupee? The other side of the bill focuses solely on the Indian digital rupee. So I would like to start with Dr. Duggal on considering the penetration of internet in two-tier cities and small towns, how successful will the model be, and how successful will the launch of digital rupee be in India?
The details of the same are still fully awaited because we have sketchy details in the public domain.
Here's the top search result.
But clearly the fact remains is that here is a foray by the government to put forward its own digital currency. We'll have to keep various things in mind, considering the fact that, well, when it's a digital currency, it must fulfill certain minimum parameters. We'll also have to look at how we have already defined the electronic format under Section 2 of the Information Technology Act 2000, and considering the fact that the IT Act is not particularly applicable to currencies, how this new legislation could potentially come up with new legal frameworks concerning the digital currency as far as India is concerned. But we'll have to be mindful of the fact that Indians have already begun to be very, very innovative. I think Indians love to subscribe to the Indian Jugaad school of management. And now with the golden age of cybercrime coming in, one of the big challenges will be how this particular digital rupee of India could potentially be misused for cybercrime and a variety of other purposes. Also, I'm particularly concerned about the cybersecurity. And given the fact that India doesn't have a dedicated law on cybersecurity, and further given the fact that the National Cybersecurity Policy of 2013 has been just a mere paper tiger, the government has an added onus to ensure that the cybersecurity of the Indian digital rupee is adequately addressed, because if that's going to be breached, that could potentially have an impact, not just upon the cyber sovereignty of the country, but also could have raised questions on the sovereignty, security, and integrity of the country. So I think we are actually going on a very, very thin ice area. We have to tread with caution. We have to be particularly careful that we do not bite more than what we can chew. And if we do in a graded manner, that could be a good starting point. But yes, the market is ready. With more and more Indians coming onto the digital bandwagon, there is more appetite for adoption and usage of the Indian digital rupee.
Mr. Kakkar, would you like to add?
I think absolutely agree with Dr. Dukkar. I think details are awaited. But I think RBI governor, the Honorable Governor over the last few weeks has made several announcements, clearly hinting to the fact that it will pave the way for a digital currency of the Reserve Bank of India. However, my apprehension is that how quickly they are able to make it user-friendly for it to actually get adopted in a scale manner, I think it remains to be seen. But it's almost certain that I think the RBI is going to sort of take up the exclusive mantle to have a digital currency in the country, which is sort of going to be labeled by them. I think one other quick point I wanted to make just on the previous discussion and Krishnendra, just to make sure that I put it in context. In my humble opinion, I don't believe the bill is going to be at all seeking to restrict or regulate the underlying technology and therefore NFT as a construct, it's a completely different beast from cryptocurrency. So I don't think that's even being attempted. I don't even think the policymakers are thinking in that direction, and so that's a positive. I think fact of the matter remains, hand on heart, 8 practitioners debating this through before a bill is coming in has only happened because you're seeing a $20 to $30 billion of Indian money stuck in this sort of framework of ecosystem. That's the only reason we are debating. And that's the context in which the debate is actually sort of reaching that. So I think if the RBI, the government is only looking at the utilization of virtual crypto in the context of payment system and the utilization of it for the monies of the people of India. I think that's the context in which the regulation will be. I don't think they will seek to restrict any use of underlying technology or NFTs.
Anirudh has a point to make.
Krishnendra, as far as a central bank digital currency is concerned, I would like to make a couple of quick points. Those may not be in line with what we have discussed, but in terms of what Deputy Governor RBI, one of the Deputy Governors, in his paper has been talking about having 2 prototypes for our digital currency, which is that a wholesale segment related currency and then a retail segment related currency, and that at best a pilot may come out in few months. But before we raise our expectation regards in relation to issue of even a pilot, please do look at what RBI Governor, banking related conclave has said around 18th of November. And as to how many times macroeconomic and financial security as a term has been used when he has addressed the issue of
Mr. Jain, yes,
CBDC.
I would quickly move to Anirudh for his comment, and then I'll switch the speaker with Mr. Ruhail will be joining us again.
But quickly, it's such an interesting topic. I know it's a never-ending subject with such a huge canvas, but Mr. Rastogi, a quick point, then maybe we can wrap it. We even had so many questions. I wish we had more time to address them. Yes.
So just to address the question around, does the regulator intend to really regulate NFT or not, and then what are the implications, even if they don't intend to, what are the implications of this law, potential law on the NFT ecosystem? And one is that one big fear for the industry is that cryptocurrency, if widely defined, and as it's likely going to be. So if you look at the current set of definitions that are doing the rounds, or you look at the 2019 draft, which obviously is the only text ever attempted by the government. So the term cryptocurrency is defined widely enough to actually potentially capture a lot of NFT use cases. And the problem with that is, while I agree the regulator may not be intending to do so, but that could be collateral damage. And why it is relevant even today, because all said and done, I mean, you have NFT marketplaces and NFT businesses operating out of India, or global businesses operating here, which will get impacted. And therefore they need to kind of look at how they are structured even today. The other implication of this would be that ultimately NFT is a blockchain-based application. So you build it and typically operate it on a global private blockchain network. When you do that, you need, as an operator, to actually pay transaction fees to the blockchain or somebody on the blockchain network in the underlying native currency of the blockchain. So if you're using the Ethereum network to operate your NFT marketplace, you will need to make certain transaction fee payments in Ether, which is the native currency of the Ethereum network. And you cannot do that if cryptocurrency payments are not permitted in the country without the right kind of exceptions. So I think there would be some implications for sure, and the industry is closely watching that.
Absolutely. I wish, as I said, we had more time. This is such an interesting discussion. 6 stalwarts talking about something which has taken the national imagination. But I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Dr. Dugal. I want to thank Mr. Kakkar. I want to thank Mr. Rastogi, Mr. Butani, Ms. Deshpande, and Mr. Jain, and my colleague Krishnendra, and the entire BW team for putting this together. And whatever was not said, I hope we can have one more discussion on this. But thank you so much for joining us today.